India has set a goal of net zero emissions by 2070. Also by 2030, to set the context, India has planned roughly 500 gigawatts of non-fossil fuel energy. Today, we're roughly half there, roughly 246. And it's been led by solar and wind. Today, we have people who are not just CEOs of companies and thought leaders, but people who are actually doing this transition, who are moving the needle. And I think India has a long way to go as a thought leader and to set global benchmarks. Given the paucity of time, I'm going to start straight going to Praveer, who's the CEO and MD of Tata Power. Praveer, how do you see the transition of clean energies which has happened till now? And how do you see the target being met by 2030, the policy interventions which have helped and which may be required to reach there?
Thank you, Devendra, and good afternoon to everyone. Thank you, Economic Times, for the invite. Such an honor and pleasure to be here. The theme that I have been hearing is power, purpose, and partnership. And I think the clean energy transition that India is talking about is about all the three things and how we are transforming. And this transformation has happened at a very fast pace. Just to give you a perspective, in 2015, we had just 5 gigawatt of solar power. Today, we have 120 gigawatt. That's a CAGR of more than 20%. And we are talking of that 2030, we'll have something like 280 gigawatt of solar, and we'll have 500 gigawatt of clean energy. And this is a huge transformation that is happening. I don't think, other than China, any other country is moving at that pace. And this also shows that there is so much more potential. So while we say that we will do 280 gigawatt of solar and 100 gigawatt of wind, I do believe that we have much better capability. We heard that the headline today in Economic Times was 6.4% growth. But I think if we do the type of transformation that we are talking about, it will definitely be north of 8 and 9%. And that's really possible. We have the capability, we have the desire, we have the people, we have the technology. The manufacturing of clean energy solutions have been done at a very fast pace, and more will get added in the coming years. And I think this will bring about the universal access of energy, because when we talk of clean energy, we talk of solar. It's not only in cities that we don't talk about only the large ones, but we also talk about the distributed renewables that can happen in villages, and the universal access and the energy poverty that we keep on hearing so many times will be a thing of the past. So I think we are geared up, and next 10 to 20 years is about the big transformation and the change. And this change is not happening only in Bollywood, it's happening over here in our sector. Power sector is one of the prime drivers for every type of growth. In fact, we find that the consumption of power in villages have increased because everyone is on their mobile and everyone wants to know what's happening globally. And so I think the transformation is here. 500 gigawatt will happen, and we'll possibly do much more than that than we have thought for ourselves.
Thank you so much, Praveer. So it's not just a sector. I think it's the backbone which is going to power India's future. Coming to Girish, who's the co-founder and chairman of the Suzlon Group. A lot of strides and congratulations in the wind sector. And as Praveer said, between 2014 and now, we've tripled our non-fossil fuel energy. But solar has grown faster. Wind has also grown, but the share of solar has become faster. We would love to hear your views on how the wind energy is currently doing, and how do you see it going forward in the next 5 years?
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon to all. I think wind and solar are both very complementary. And if we look at our country, today of the total potential we have in our country is about 1.1 terawatt of energy of wind that we can produce. And we've just crossed about 51 gigawatts right now. So that's about 4% of the total potential that we have kind of harnessed in our country. So, the kind of potential we have, the blessings that we have as a country is fantastic. The other element is that when we look at, the wind pattern in our country and the power consumption pattern of the country, there is a very good correlation between when power can be generated from the wind energy and the power consumption that we have in our country, during the day also and in the seasonalities also. What it means is that when we are moving to become kind of renewable energy is moving to become the prime source of energy for our country, a combination of wind and solar will ensure that we get energy on demand with the addition of battery storage to that. So effectively, there is a very complementary, while in solar case, of course, we have the, the peak kind of generation that happens during the day, but the power peaks which our country has in the evening peak and the morning, this cannot be served with solar. So a combination of wind and solar, a right energy mix, is where what this will ensure also is from the consumers, we will see that cost of energy with a balance of the right mix, we'll be able to ensure that the cost of energy to the end consumer is under control. If you look in terms of the growth till now, what we've had, there are of course definite advantages with solar, with which, the simplicity with which you can build up anywhere, almost anywhere in our country, gives a great advantage of distributed generation, as Sir said. So I think that's a given thing, and that has helped us to move very fast. Wind is, of course, a little complex technology. It involves a lot of complex science to build up the projects, and it's huge kind of equipments that you move around with in the country. So putting all that together, I think the build-up which has happened till now is reaching a stage where now the scale-up where we are looking at, just like solar, we have hit almost the midpoint of the 2050 target, 2030 target. In wind also, we've hit that. So I think with the kind of biddings that have happened and the market development that has happened in the private sector also and public sector, hitting the 100 gigawatt mark by 2030 looks almost certain for wind also.
Thank you. You mentioned on private sector and policy making. Let's stay with the private sector. Coming to you, Vibhuti, what do you see the role of private sector? How's it been? And can we also touch upon the financing? What innovative models are happening to finance? Because India will need trillions. And it's not a question of whether it will happen, when it will happen. So we may have your thoughts.
Right. So private sector really has played a very instrumental role when it comes to renewable energy deployment in the country. If you look back 20 years ago, or even 2015 targets, or the capacity that we are talking about, I think that would not have been possible without private sector support. Initially, it was the private NBFCs who really pioneered in kind of giving the investment to a sector which had very prohibitive price formation. And at that time, there was nobody else but private NBFCs who were the first one to kind of come ahead and support this renewable energy. And then post that, we have seen market reforms, policies, which really played instrumental in bringing the much needed investor confidence and a lot more private sector participation, which brought operational efficiencies as well as technology innovation, and we have seen in the last 10 years itself the kind of growth India witnessed in terms of renewable energy deployment. And we can proudly say that more than 50% of the capacity is now from non-fossil fuel sources, which is not a small feat if we just look few years back. So what we now need to shift is just from capacity to generation discussion, because the share of generation of renewable energy has gone up substantially again, but we really need to ensure that most of the generation or much of the energy needs are being met through renewable energy. Now, in terms of investments, if you just to give you some numbers, in 2024 alone, more than 83% of the investments in the power sector had gone to clean energy. So most of the investments are now climate aligned. So that's the big shift that we are witnessing. And that is also because there have been, as I said, a right set of policies that play a very instrumental role. We have seen government coming up with the 4 billion sovereign green bond, which again kind of help, and especially for technologies that are nascent. They are not well established, and that's where the more support from government is required. And once the initial few projects are being supported from the government, we see a lot more interest from the private sector. So we also need, there's a big role that the public sector, the public investments play a role, but once that capital comes in, that really unlocks a lot of private interest. So I think we need that as well. In terms of specifically, in terms of looking at innovative models, I would say that, one of the big risks that we still have, despite government coming up with so many, regulations, we have late payment surcharge, still off-taker risk, which is the amount that the consumer, and here when we say consumer, it's largely the distribution companies. We have Mr. Sinha, he's an exception. Tata Power is an exception where, there is less risk, they make timely payments, but in general in India with many distribution companies, the risk, off-taker risk is still much higher. To an extent, that has been addressed by, by SECI and NTPC tenders, where they have come up with escrow accounts, where they have come up with payment security funds. But there are also tenders which are state-driven. We don't see those kind of risk mechanisms there. So we really need the state-level tenders to also build in those payment security mechanisms as well. The other large consumers is your corporates and multinational, who because of, their targets for net zero have made big commitments, and I think as early as January 2025, we have 45 gigawatt of corporate PPAs, but they also come with a challenge, that there is a lot of bankability risk with the corporate PPAs at times, because those projects are for 10, 15 years. Whereas if you look at from the conventional lending perspective, any project which does not have a PPA for 25 years, it's considered much riskier. So there is less appetite for either not to invest at all or provide capital at a much higher interest rate, which then disturbs your commercial viability of the project. So I think for those, we really need different instruments like, first loss guarantee, and once I think the projects get developed, bundling it with InvIT, that really plays a big role. That free up a lot of capital as well. So I think that's another way. Third, I would say blended finance again, especially for technologies which I said are at nascent stage. The level of technology readiness is less. We are still doing a lot more R&D. At least for those technologies, I think the blended finance, pooling in resources from multilaterals, climate funds, that will really help in unlocking more and more private capital. And lastly, I would say for India specifically, and given worldwide, the way we are seeing the currency risk, because of factors which are beyond your control. So there are a lot of geopolitical risks, which kind of also has an impact on the currency. So coming up with more rupee-denominated, instruments can really help in bridging that gap.
Thanks, and actually as you were speaking, it completely resonates with me because speaking of financing, we are an electric vehicle company, mass mobility platform, completely funded by $1 billion clean fund, only which can invest in green. And we are actually using open source, in some of the states to become net zero. Sanjeev, the chairman of PwC, power demand in India will grow. And within that, clean energy is even growing faster. So we know it's a growth story. But what about people, professionals, inclusiveness? What about the impact on communities? If in case any job losses or employment, What are your views? How do you see that developing?
So, good afternoon, everyone. I think Devendra, the first thing is that, I mean, if you look at the job numbers, particularly on the renewable energy side, I think they've been going up. I mean, just as an example, 1 gigawatt of wind power supposed to be creating anywhere between 8 to 10,000 jobs. So I think that's just a case in point. If we have to meet our ambitions, our goals that we have set for ourselves, even for 2030, it would appear that we'll need at least 26 to 30% more people who are just trained on renewable energy. Now that's something which tells me that there is enough and more opportunity which is there in that segment from a job standpoint. A critical point, however, there is that when we look at the ability of these people, only 30% of them are today job ready, and that is actually a problem. And I think that's one area to address. I completely take the point about job security, etc. But if 30% of these people are only job ready for the demands of the renewable energy space, and now with AI and the crisscross between technology and sustainability, which we can talk about later, I think even more so. So I think the huge focus has to be first on skilling these people to make sure, and I think there is a lot of effort which has been put in by the government also to make sure that people are skilled. Tata Power themselves actually take a lot of effort in actually skilling these people, and I think that's more of that is needed. We also possibly need to make sure, like we do for instance, in some American colleges, etc., maybe have very specific courses on renewable energy which people can embrace and graduate in, rather than just being the traditional engineers, etc. And I think somewhere the whole partnership between government and academia is very, very important. And because why only colleges? Start in schools. I mean, if this is going to be such a big contributor to my GDP on a go-forward basis, start from schools. I think that's the way you look at it. I think your point about inclusivity is a good one. And I was just reading the other day that there is a self-help group in Northeast where women are actually trained for maintaining all the solar rooftops. And I think that, we have been talking about getting more and more women in the workforce. I mean, what better way to create inclusive growth by actually having more and more women in the workforce.
What is it like, Sid, to come back to this kind of genre after a while, after Student of the Year? Even the music where they say...
Maybe last point I'll address. I think there are certain challenges as well. I mean, if you look at our fossil fuels, the fossil fuels it's really our eastern states which are rich in fossil fuels. And when we think about that, there will be displacement. When we say that, okay, we focus on wind and solar, and that appears to be more the south and the western belt, there will be displacement. So how do we make sure that these people who will be displaced, do find alternative jobs? Skilling is one part of it. We have been talking about agro-photovoltaic. Can that be a solution, for instance? We have been talking about, reskilling them and, getting them involved in the renewable energy piece where the job requirements are there. And then, of course, funding mechanisms, whether we do it through a coal cess or whatever else. I think these are areas that we'll have to focus on. The one last thing which I would certainly say, and maybe that's not something where you were hinting at, but I must say that I think, and in this fractured world, there is certainly a need for greater cooperation between global economies, because the global south is not getting the funding that it needs. And while Vibhuti did speak about the funding needs, I'd say that at a broader level, there is huge amount of funding requirements, without which, and some part of that should go in making sure that there is equality.
Thanks. To Praveer, you and Girish, what are the new developments in the renewable sector? For example, offshore wind, or you touched upon solar and wind hybrids. And whatever be the target by 2030, what do you see the role of hydrogen, nuclear, or battery as a storage, new subjects which are coming up to play a part in the renewable story? Starting with you, Praveer.
Just to add one more point, what Sanjeev mentioned about skilling. We set up a plant in Tamil Nadu, a manufacturing plant for solar cell and modules. There is a requirement of nearly 4,000 operators. We have 80% operators who are women operators, and they are young girls, 21, 22, 23-year-old girls who were trained over there, and today they work exceedingly well. We did arrange a visit of some of our journalist friends, including from ET, and they've gone and seen for themselves that how efficiently those girls are working. In fact, now the demand is that we should have more girls only and not replacement with boys. So that's the type of skill sets that they come up with and the diligence that they come up with. I think today the transition in clean energy is not about just providing clean energy, because solar is for solar hours and wind is in the wind hours. But what is important is that how do we make it available 24/7? How do we make it to meet your requirement right through the day? And it has to be meeting the requirement for everyone. It has to meet the requirement of industries. It has to meet the requirement of commercial establishments, offices. It has to meet the requirement of residential customers also. And it's very, very important that we come up with hybrid solutions. We already have very good hybrid solutions of solar and wind, solar during daytime and wind during evening and nighttime. We also have very good combinations where solar, wind and battery storage is there. We have combinations of solar, wind, battery storage and pump storage, hydro storage is there. So I think there are a whole lot of combinations which is coming, and the whole purpose is to provide quality power and also provide at a lower tariff. We heard tariffs, a tariff. In power sector, the tariff goes down. That's what is important, not going up like some other places. So it's very important for us to bring down the cost of power and make our industries more efficient and more competitive globally. You mentioned about some of the newer technologies. We have done a lot of work on onshore wind, but offshore wind we have not been able to do. Of course, the wind speed and the cost is a challenge, but there's still a lot of work, and I'm sure Girish Bhai will touch on that. Secondly, on nuclear, the government has announced that there will be a change in policy, and we've been working very closely with the government and the Niti Aayog. That will happen. It is in works. It's a question of time. It was expected that it would happen in the monsoon session, but maybe in the winter session. Issues about technology, issues about the civil liabilities, all those things have to be sorted out. India has set an ambitious target to have 100 gigawatt by 2047. Definitely doable. It's not that this has not been done. We've done in renewable, and I mentioned to you that how in last 10 years the whole paradigm shift has taken place. So also it will happen with more competition, private sector, global players coming, better technology. 100 gigawatt by 2047 in renewable, in nuclear is definitely feasible. So I think the transition to clean energy is not something which is a choice today. It is an imperative for us, and I don't think we should put it under the carpet and wish it away, because the type of climate change and the impact it is happening on the society and on the countries is something which is a reality. And we all have to work towards that, and that's where I think the partnership between the government and the other stakeholders is important. And from the private sector in India, I think everyone is geared up. We are just waiting for the right ecosystem to be created, and we'll possibly implement that.
I think, just before I add to what Praveer sir said, I think to continue from Sanjeev, one of the things that, because this is one area where there is a strong focus that our group has also is on the skill development, because I think that's very critical. And I think the way we are handling it right now is that we of course have our own strong skill development program within the company, which we run various centers across India. But additionally, what we've done is that we work closely with about 25 plus universities across the 9 windy states that we have, right from Rajasthan to Tamil Nadu, and working very closely with them in developing programs and working to make sure that the best talent actually gets employed very quickly as almost a guarantee on job. So that has worked well. I think we've been doing that now for over a decade, and it's developing good talent pool. We, of course, having been one of the early starters in clean tech, had de facto responsibility of building skill. So we've kind of spent a lot of time and effort on building the clean tech skill on that. And lately we've started working with government. I think we've opened a few skill development center in Andhra Pradesh now. We are also doing that in Gujarat, and other states are also coming up with their strong programs on skill development. So preparing our young talent for the green jobs of tomorrow is something that as a group we kind of spend a lot of time and effort on. With regards to the new solutions, I think surely, and I mean, we are seeing that both, be it on the private sector, the pure industrial segment, utilities, as well as the PSUs, we are seeing a clear shift from a pure wind or a pure solar projects to FDRE, as we call it, firm and dispatchable power. And effectively, the idea is that, and today if you see from a technology solutions point of view, the amount of innovation that is happening in our industry in India, purely on the clean tech side, probably is best in the world. The kind of transition that is happening in a very balanced way, because what is critical for our country is that cost of energy has to remain very low. That's the tough part. And I think today, in a very beautiful way, all the technologies have come together, be it wind, be it solar, be it the new storage technologies of different forms, in a combination where we are able to produce today cheapest source of energy when you compare to any other conventional source of energy. And this I'm saying without putting the cost of carbon. If you put off cost of carbon, then we are way miles ahead. So I think from that point of view, the market has surely shifted to a mix of energy. Of course, wind and solar remain as the primary source of energy globally also, which are the most successful ones. So that's the one shift. To touch base on offshore wind, I think our country is blessed with a large coastline, and that gives us huge opportunity for future buildup of offshore wind. There is initial work happening in our country right now on the assessment side. 2 areas have been identified, one in the state of Gujarat, other in Tamil Nadu. And basically the initial assessments are being done, and the idea is to set up first 500 megawatt project at both the locations, which Government of India is kind of wanting to build up. So initial work is happening. I think where we have a little different trajectory for offshore wind in our country that's going to go through is, today when we compare the cost of generation on land versus offshore for India, it's almost 3x. So when you are able to produce the same energy at 1/3 the cost on land, why would you want to go offshore? Now, typically the countries which have gone offshore are primarily for 2 reasons. One is those are largely landlocked countries. They don't have enough space on land, and therefore, as I said earlier, India has just used 4% of its land which is capable of generating electricity. So we have enough land still available to do the onshore wind part of it. Others is that the wind potential in the sea is much higher. Not so much for us, because the Indian Ocean is a little quieter ocean, and the delta that you get to go from onshore to offshore is not that significant. After factoring all the costs and the benefits, it's still 3x. So it's a journey. However, I would like to say that from a product and technology and capability, at least in the wind sector today, with the kind of, because we've had this, it started on quite early in the early mid-90s. So we've had a good span of 30 years of developing the sector. I think today, the whole ecosystem which is developed in our country, almost 2,500 MSMEs are working in the industry. And today, the total installed capacity of all the main components in terms of manufacturing capacity that we have is almost 3 to 4x of what India consumes. Largely because a good portion, whatever we are producing in India, almost equal amount today India exports in wind. Meaning our products are of world class, great performance, cost competitive. So India has a great advantage in wind, where we can not just meet our own requirement, but India is geared up. If you look at the last estimate of GWEC which came out, by 2030 it is expected that India will be supplying almost 10% of the global supply chain of wind. And that could go as high as about $25 billion of earnings for our country. So that's the other angle. There is the global angle also that wind offers in.
No, thank you so much. And As we were speaking on skilling, we run 1,500 electric vehicle buses, and we have women driving buses in India. In fact, we made a record of sorts from a full bus driven by women, with the women host, all guests as women going from Delhi, Agra and back. I think our time has run out. There was a lot of question I wanted to ask. But as this conversation comes to an end, I think it's very clear that clean energy transition, it's not a question of if, but when and how. And if we can do it, taking along communities, being inclusive, and making sure India stands tall in the global order and probably beating the numbers ahead of targets. Thank you so much, all of you. Thanks for joining the panel, and thank you, audience.